a delight to be in Enid, Oklahoma. I've been looking forward to this trip. In fact, when I got up this morning, I told my wife, I said, well, you know, today's the big day. Going to Enid, Oklahoma, speak to those folks, they'll have a big crowd. I said, man, I am looking forward to it. I've got a speech that'll knock their socks off. I mean, and she was sitting there, you know, in her usual enthusiasm, and I'd say, I'm really going to be terrific. She'd say, mm-hmm. And I'd say, man, they're going to laugh. They'll just have a good time. Mm-hmm. I said, how many really great speakers do you suppose there are in America? She said, well, I don't know what kind of figure you got in mind, but I'm sure it's one less than you're thinking. My wife's a nice lady. We've had 25 years of happy married life, and 25 out of 30 is not too bad, I don't think. I was really glad to get here because, you know, there's so many things going on the road now, so many accidents. You know, you always worry about your safety, especially when you're flying. And in fact, we had a funny thing happen. I went to get my bags and check them in. I stepped up to the airline counter and I said to the man, I want to go to Enid, Oklahoma, and I want you to send my bags to Boston, Massachusetts. The young lady said, well, I'm sorry, sir, we can't do that. I said, I don't know why not. You did that last week. And you have so many funny things happen, particularly when you're flying. We had a little old lady, for example, came up to the counter there in Nashville. She was banging on the counter. She said, how can anything that goes 600 miles an hour be late? I don't know. But just as we got on the plane, the pilot really got to her. She was real nervous, you know, and she was saying to him, Mr. Captain, do airplanes like this crash very often? He said, no, ma'am, only once. And one time I was on a flight. We were in Cincinnati, Ohio, and just as we were getting ready to leave, the pilot said, ladies and gentlemen, I regret to tell you this, but one of the warning lights on the instrument panel has come on, and we're going to be delayed for a few minutes while a mechanic takes care of it. So a guy comes on with a screwdriver, and he tinkered around a little bit, you know, and then we were ready to go. And then we got out the end of the runway and we roared the engines up real big. We were just fixing to go, and all of a sudden the pilot says, I regret to tell you this, folks, but we've had the same problem again. The warning light has come back on. We're going to go back in. They tell us that rather than be delayed trying to fix this, we're just going to swap planes. Be about 30 minutes while we get another plane over to the terminal. By the way, that always bothered me. That bother you? I mean, you're fixing to get on a piece of machine put together by the lowest bidder, right? It flies at 35, 40,000 feet in the air, 600 miles an hour, and they refer to the starting place as terminal. Anyway, we're sitting there, see, and killing a little time while they try to fix everything, get a new plane over. And I turn around, here's a real nice-looking young lady selling flight insurance. Now, I don't normally buy flight insurance. I've got plenty of insurance, and I don't buy it, but I thought, you know, maybe I ought to make an exception today. I mean, I've already had 2 warnings. So I went over to this very nice young lady and I said, would you mind selling me a $50,000 policy? She said, certainly, and wrote out the paperwork. I gave her a $20 bill. In my change, there were some pennies. Just as I turned to walk away, here's one of these old-fashioned scales like you used to see in the drugstore, you know, it gives you your weight and your fortune. So I stepped up on the scale and I put a pin in that thing. A little card came out and said, you weigh 185 pounds and your recent investments are about to pay off. And I just love it to go to these big high-class hotels. I mean, that's really a nice treat. I was speaking for a group in New York City not too long ago. It was a political group. A lot of big wigs there, you know, highfalutin folks. I was up there at the head table. The guy that was going to introduce us had a whole bunch of 3x5 cards with everybody's name on it. He dropped them on the floor, scooped them all up in a hurry. I thought, my goodness, he'll never get this right. Sure enough, he said, our speaker tonight is Mr. Georgegoldtrap, a man who's made $1 million in Texas oil. I said, well, that wasn't exactly right. It wasn't Texas, it was Florida. And it wasn't oil, it was cattle. And it wasn't $1 million, it was $10,000. And we didn't make it, we lost it. And it wasn't me, it was my brother. But just as I was sitting there eating, I ran out of butter for my roll. So I motioned to the maitre d', I said, would you give me another one of those little patties of butter, please, for my roll? And he said, well, sir, I'm awfully sorry. But he said, we just allow 1 patty of butter for each diner. And I thought, well, that's the silliest thing I ever heard of. I said, maybe you don't know who I am. He said, no, sir. I said, well, I'm George Goldtrap from Nashville, Tennessee. I'm associated with WSM Television and the Grand Ole Opry Station. And I said, I'm the keynote speaker here tonight. These folks have paid $1,000 a plate to get in to hear me speak. He said, well, maybe you don't know who I am. I said, no, sir. You've got me at a disadvantage there. Who are you? He said, I'm the man in charge of the butter. I am delighted to see you laughing. I really think laughter is important. In fact, I want to give you a little advice. If you'll spend a lot of time laughing now, when you get old, all of your wrinkles will be in the right places. You know, laughter is so important that there's an awful lot to be said about the value of it. And I want to talk to you a few minutes tonight about the value of laughter and how it's going to help you, not just tonight, but throughout all of your life. For indeed, laughter improves your health and all of your life in general. Has it ever occurred to you, for example, that you and I are made in the image of God? And God is eternal. That makes me wonder. I wonder, is laughter eternal? Maybe there's going to be laughter in heaven. I certainly hope so, because the Scriptures say there's going to be joy and happiness and that sort of thing. And surely laughter is a part of that. I look forward to going to a place where there is laughter eternally. So God has made me so that I can laugh and get a lot of practice while I'm here. Laughter is very valuable. David said in one of the Psalms that God laughs. David also said that laughter is something that you ought to keep as a regular part of your daily life. Solomon said there is a time to laugh. And further he said laughter or happiness or joy, depending on the translation you read, is the best medicine. Tonight I want to give you a real good dose of laughter, because laughter is just so important. Somebody has said that since man is the only thing that God created that can laugh, man is God's laughter temple. And maybe that's right. Why, of all of God's creations, is man the only one who can laugh? Now, all of God's creations almost can cry. You take an oak tree, for example. Great big oak tree, maybe 2 or 3 feet in diameter, maybe 4. And you hit it with a 16-pound sledgehammer, boom, and you watch it. At the point of impact, that oak tree will swell up. In just a few moments, tears will trickle down. An oak tree can cry, but an oak tree doesn't laugh. At my house, we got an old Siamese tomcat. We've had him about 17, 18 years. He thinks he owns a place. You know how Siamese, they're so contrary anyway. He's getting old now. He's got a little arthritis and can't see well. And he gets under my feet, and every once in a while I step on his tail. He'll say, meow, as if to say, you know, I'm down here. I hear him cry every once in a while, but I've never heard him laugh. And I've tried some good material on him too. Of all of God's creations, man is the only one that can laugh. Maybe the reason for that is that God figured there are going to be some problems in your life that you can't solve any other way. Have you ever hit a situation like that where there's nothing to do but laugh? You're at home by yourself and you trip and fall down on the throw rug, or you fall down the steps. There's nobody there to cry on. There's nobody there to extend any sympathy. You're not really hurt except your pride, and you sit there and you laugh and you say, how did I get in this mess? And you hit your funny bone. Now you talk about something misnamed. What's funny about the funny bone? But it's about the only way to deal with that kind of situation. Sometimes you face some personal problems, some adversity in life, and all you can do is laugh at it. Have you ever noticed how your folks, or maybe the older folks, the grandparents, will talk about the adversities they had when they first got married or during the Depression, and it seems now to be funny, and they laugh at it. Wasn't funny at the time, but the further you get away from it, somehow the funnier it is. You know, Shakespeare said that tragedy and humor are separated only by time and space, and I think that's right. And another thing about laughter is that sometimes you have to laugh even if you know you shouldn't or don't want to. At church, for example, you ever get one of those situations at church where you think, you know, I can't laugh, and then you just laugh. Not too long ago, we were at church and we invited one of the teenagers to say the prayer at the communion table. I don't believe this boy had ever said a public prayer before in his life. We were all very quiet, sitting there, you know, like we'd been sprayed with holy. She's been there. We were all sitting there, and this young man bowed his head and gave thanks for the fruit of the loom. What do you do? I don't know. You just laugh. And I tell you something. Don't let me interrupt it anyway. I tell you something else about laughter. Laughter cannot be buried. It just comes out. You can't bury laughter. Some of you here are old enough to remember back when Nikita Khrushchev was president of whatever it is, premier of Russia, you know. And he banged on the table one time at the United Nations building, took his shoe off. He said, "We will bury you." Remember that? Well, don't look now, but he's been buried. And we're still laughing. 2 years ago, I spent several weeks behind the Iron Curtain in Russia and Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, communist nations. And I didn't see a lot of folks laughing. There wasn't a whole lot to laugh at. It's a pitiful sight where they are. Let me tell you a little personal story. Some years ago, I got a call. I'd been home. And I had visited home and gone back to my home in Florida. And I got a call that said, "You better come back home. Your dad's dying." I knew that he was very ill. And so I went back. And before I got there, he'd already passed away. And this is a true story now. They had his body in the funeral home. And I got in late that afternoon, went straight to the funeral home, got there about 7:30, 8 o'clock. And a lot of friends and family were already there. And you know, when you go to a funeral home under a situation like that, it's a lot like a picnic or a family reunion. You know, you see friends that you haven't seen in a long time. Folks come from all over. My father had been a businessman in Nashville for 30 years, so he had all these customers that he'd accumulated over the years, and they all came. He was highly thought of and respected, and he liked to tell people funny stories. He was an amateur humorist, and he always had a funny story to tell people. And so all of these folks had come to the funeral home, and when I walked in the door, maybe 200 people in the room, big place, and the room was full of chatter and laughter, almost like a picnic. And at first I was shocked and surprised, and then I went among the crowd and I shook hands with people and I thanked them for coming and told them I appreciated it, and I realized why they were laughing. What do you do when you get together like that? You remember your association with the deceased, you know. And you say, "Well, I remember when we this and I remember when we that," you know. And these folks were remembering funny stories that my father had told them. And as soon as one would tell, that would remind another one of a story, and they got to going back and forth, and pretty soon the room was full of laughter. And I thought to myself, you know, there are a lot worse ways you can leave this world than to leave it with a room full of laughing people. So laughter is so important. I take another place you don't expect to see laughter, but there's plenty there. Do you ever walk through a cemetery and see funny things? Oh, there are a lot of funny things in a cemetery. I saw a grave marker one time that said, "Here lies Jim McFadden, shot by his enemy." And then underneath it said, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." Then I saw one once that said, "Here lies Sam Ludlow, drowned at sea." And then underneath it said, "By a few faithful friends." But I think one of my favorites is an ad I saw one time in a newspaper that said, "For sale, used grave marker, excellent buy for anyone named Murphy." You know, I was mentioning how we're created in the image of God. God recommends laughter, you know. There's an awful lot in the New Testament about joy and happiness and rejoicing and that kind of thing. And as I said earlier, Solomon said there is a time to laugh, and laughter is good medicine. And laughter really does improve your health. There's a lot of scientific fact to support that. A fellow by the name of Weisinger, Dr. Weisinger, has written a book, and it's called the Anger Workout Book. Have you read that? And in his book, Dr. Weisinger says everybody ought to have at least 15 laughs per day just to maintain good health. And he says at least 3 of them ought to be what he calls belly laughs. I hope you'll get your share here tonight. Then there's a fellow by the name of Dr. William Fry, teaches at Samford University. He's written 3 books on humor. And he says that if you laugh a lot, it will improve your heart rate, it will stabilize your blood pressure, it will oxygenate your blood, that makes you feel better and act better, it will improve your circulation, your respiratory system, it will stimulate your alertness hormones, it will relieve pain, and it counters negative fears. Think about all of those good things that are being done every time you laugh. Oh, but that's not all. Have any of you read the book by Dr. S.I. Macmillan? He's an Adventist physician. He has a book that's titled None of These Diseases. I'm sure some of you have read it. Dr. Macmillan says that fully 30% of any cure is laughter. Oh, but there's more. Perhaps my favorite is Norman Cousins. Now, Norman Cousins is an intelligent man. For 30 years, Norman Cousins was the editor of Saturday Review, a very prestigious literary magazine. He has written 15, 16, 17 books. One of his most famous books is a work that's called Anatomy of an Illness. And he wrote the book because he became very ill with a kind of disease that causes the connecting tissues of the body to turn loose from each other. And he was literally falling apart. You ever go to the doctor and you get that bad news? You know, one fellow went to the doctor and the doctor said, well, I think we ought to run some tests. So he ran some tests. The man went back a few days later and the doctor said, well, I've got bad news and worse news. The man said, well, what's the bad news? The doctor said, the bad news is you've only got 24 hours to live. And the man got excited. He said, what on earth could be worse than that? The doctor said, I was supposed to have told you yesterday. One fellow was having a lot of trouble with his leg, so he went in the operating room. They took the leg off. When he woke up, the doctor said, well, I've got bad news and good news. And the man said, well, give me the bad news first. He said, well, the bad news is that somehow in just an error, we don't know, but somehow we took off the wrong leg. And the man said, well, for goodness sakes, what is the good news? He said, well, the good news is that other leg's not quite as bad as we thought it was. But my favorite, I guess, is the guy who went to the doctor and the doctor said, you are too fat. And the man said, I want to get a second opinion. The doctor said, all right, you're ugly too. But Norman Cousins says he went to this doctor, and the doctor analyzed him and said, you've got this disease that's causing your body to literally fall apart. And he said, we don't know of very many cases of this, and in most cases the person who has the disease dies. He said, I'll tell you the honest truth, we don't know of many people who've ever made it. He said the odds are 1 in 500 that you won't live. 1 in 500. Norman Cousins said, well, if the odds are that low, I've got to do everything I can to make life pleasant and try to beat it. And he said, I'm going to do all I can do. So he said, I read somewhere just the other day that more people die in hospitals than any place else in America. So if you're sick, the thing to do is get out of the hospital. So Norman Cousins moved into a private hotel room, bought himself a motion picture projector, and he got all of the funny films he could find. Laurel and Hardy, Amos and Andy, Dagwood and Blondie, and all that kind of stuff. And he started watching these funny movies. And he noticed that the more he laughed, the better he felt. And so the doctors put telemetry devices on his body, and they monitored his body as he laughed, and they discovered that they could literally see the chemical changes take place in his body while he was laughing. And in just a few days he felt better. And a few more days go by and he's up and going, and guess what? Norman Cousins beat those 1 in 500 odds. He's alive and well today. And since that time, Norman Cousins has conquered a second major illness. And he is on the staff of a medical university, though he is not a doctor. But he's on the staff because they want him to tell those doctors how to be happy and cheerful and make people feel better even when they're sick. Oh yes, laughter is good for us. Norman Cousins says it's vital to any cure. I'll tell you something, folks. You don't stop laughing when you grow old. It's the other way around. You grow old when you stop laughing. There's so many good things to say for laughter, but you know, I know this too. There are some folks that literally enjoy being sick. Do you know that? I mean, there are folks that they really enjoy being sick. They can't wait to tell you how sick they've been. There are congregations of the Lord's church that meet for the specific purpose of comparing notes on who's been the sickest since last Sunday. Yeah, I've been there. And they come, how you get along? Oh, I'm not feeling so well. How are you, sister? Oh, I'm a lot worse than he is. I think the thing that really got me one day, I was preaching to this congregation where they like to be sick. I think the thing that really got me was I was standing at the door one day and I said to this man, how are you feeling? He said, well, I'm not nearly as good as I was yesterday, but I think I'm better than I'm going to be tomorrow. This man was planning his sickness a day in advance. I got so sick of hearing that stuff, I got in the pulpit one day and I said, folks, I have had it up to here with your illnesses. I don't want to hear it anymore. I said, I tell you what. Today, I'm going to stand at this door over here on this side, and all of you that are feeling good go out that door. And all of you that are not feeling so well, I want you to go out this door over here. Well, let me tell you, there was no big log jam at my door. I probably should also tell you I'm not preaching there anymore. Seriously, I had to leave there due to illness and fatigue. They were sick and tired of me. And you know, after I left there, they continued to send me their church bulletin. Now, you fellows that preach, have you noticed this? After you leave a place, they always keep mailing you the church bulletin long after you've gone. You notice that? You know the reason for that? They want you to know how well they're doing without you. So I got this church bulletin, and it's printed on legal paper. Now, don't ask me what illegal paper is. I don't have any idea. But it's printed on legal paper, and right down the center, all the way down from bottom to top, there's a list of the sick. Some of them, you know, just said not feeling too well, but they didn't want to leave anybody out. And I looked at that thing, and I counted it, and I couldn't see how in the world there was anybody left well enough to put out the bulletin. There's not but 80 people in the whole church. But there it was. They liked to brag about their sickness. So I stood there, and I listened. Dr. Albert Schweitzer, a very intelligent man, said one time, disease leaves me very rapidly because it finds so little hospitality. Would that all of us could adapt that kind of a motto. But you know, I got to thinking about laughter, and I wanted to give you some examples tonight of some really funny things, and I thought, what can I use as an example? And then it occurred to me, wait a minute, this is a banquet of church folks. And they're guests, and they go to church, and they know that sometimes some of the funniest things that ever happen at church. And I got to making a list of all the funny things, and it's unbelievable. Some of the things, and you know what? The funniest things sometimes happen during the announcements. You ever hear these fellows get up and make the announcements? You know that. We have these few announcements. The ladies of the church have cast-off clothing, and they may be seen in the church basement on Friday. Don't you love it? We regret to announce that Brother Brown has been run over by a steamroller. He's in General Hospital in rooms 38, 39, and 40. And you know, now we got all these specialty classes. You know, you got a class, you name it, somebody's teaching a class on it, right? Here's one I heard the other day. A fellow said, we regret to announce that the special class on clairvoyance has been canceled due to unforeseen circumstances. One time a church was having Ladies' Day. And he said, now, you know, this is not Ladies' Day, but Mother's Day, yeah. Mother's Day. He said, you know, this is Mother's Day, and every year we give a rose to the oldest mother, or we give a rose to the youngest mother, or to the newest mother. But he said, we're not going to do that this year. This year, we're going to give a rose to every single mother in this room. One fellow said, the lesson today is on the sin of gossip. Now, before the lesson, we'll sing I Love to Tell the Story. Tonight's lesson is titled, I Think I'm Going to Kill Myself. Please mark in your hymn books the invitation song, Why Do You Wait, Dear Brother? Following the song, we will all stand and pass out. I hear that one about once a week. At the proper time, Dr. Smith will lead us in a moment of silent medication. I want to ask you, please, to remember those who are sick of this congregation. That's a lot of folks, you know that? And then I love the guy who said, we want you to come back and visit with us every time you are welcome. Preachers, bless their hearts, they often say the wrong thing. I have a preacher friend who'd been on a hunting trip, and he hadn't done very well at all. And as he came back home, he was walking down the creek bank, kind of moping along. He was really kind of disgusted that he had such a bad day. And as he walked along, he heard footsteps behind him. And he turned around and looked, and there was a big old brown bear. That bear was standing up on his hind legs, stretched out like this, and about 9 feet tall. You know, he was fixing to pounce on the man. Arrgh! And this poor preacher, he dropped to his knees. He said, Lord, Lord, please let that be a Christian bear. Well, he opened his eyes, and the bear was on his knees. And the bear was saying, bless this food to the nourishment of our bodies. One time I was preaching, I had a lesson on the strong men in the Old Testament. And I was preaching away. I mean, I was waxing elephants, as they say. And I mean, I had this lesson down pat. And I'd make some point about this strong man in the Old Testament, and my wife sitting on about the third row, and she's usually very encouraging. She's sitting right there on about the third row, and every time I'd make a point like that, she'd shake her head. I thought, what's wrong with her? I checked my notes. I mean, I'm a noted speaker. And I made another strong point about the strong men in the Old Testament. And I was really pounding the pulpit. In fact, it said there on my notes, weak point, pound pulpit. And I made this point, and there sat my wife. I thought, what is wrong? I checked, made sure everything was buttoned and zipped. You know, I didn't. I was embarrassed. We got in the car to go home. I was sitting there behind the wheel, and she was sitting over here on this side, right up against the door with her arms crossed, sitting there right against the door, where she's been sitting ever since we married. One day she said to me, George, why don't we ever sit close together like we did when we were dating? I said, well, I ain't moved. But she's sitting over there, she's got her arms crossed, you know, that negative body language. I could tell. So I said, what in the world is wrong with you today? She said, what did you preach about this morning? I said, you know good and well what I preached about. You sat there during the whole lesson and made faces. She said, no, now just tell me, what did you preach about this morning? I said, I preached about the strong man in the Old Testament. She said, and what's his name? I said, Samson. She said, well, then how come you kept calling him Tarzan? I used to always try out my sermons on her, and she would kind of be my test, you know, and I had to quit that. She got undependable. She didn't always understand the illustrations. One day I was just trying to be funny, and I said, did you hear the story about the dirty window? She said, no. I said, well, you couldn't see through it anyway. Well, she went running across the street to the neighbor's house. She said, did you hear the story about the window you couldn't see through? My neighbor says, no. Peg said, well, it's too dirty to tell. I tell you, one preacher got up in the pulpit one Sunday morning. I hadn't think about this when I was telling that Tarzan story. This preacher got up in the pulpit, and they had one of these nice new modern glass pulpits. You've seen those things. Oh, they are pretty. And he was standing there, and he was fixing to preach, and just as he got ready to preach, he looked down, and he had dressed in such a hurry, he was late, he realized he had failed to zip his pants up. He was embarrassed. He said, my, I cannot stand here in front of these people with my pants unzipped. What am I going to do? He said, I got an idea. He said, let us pray. Now, wait a minute. Don't get ahead of me. Everybody bows their head, you know. While he's saying his prayer, he's slipping down here and zipping his pants. Amen. Started to get up and discovered he'd zipped his tie up in his pants. Now he can't get up. What's he going to do? He said, let us pray again. One young preacher, you wouldn't think that's so funny if it happened to you. One young preacher went to this town, and he was really anxious to get the folks fired up. You know, he was brand new, and he really wanted to make a hit with them. So he went out to the lumber yard, and he bought a sheet of plywood, 4 by 8, sprayed it white paint. Great big red letters this high he put on there. If you are tired of sin, come inside. Put that out there on the front, you know. Sunday morning he went to church and somebody had written underneath in lipstick, if not, call 772. Preachers have to do a lot of visiting, a lot of counseling. Sometimes it's dangerous. You don't know exactly what to say. I saw a man not too long ago, hadn't seen him in quite some time, and I said, well, how's your wife? Well, he kind of bowed his head, and he said, well, you know, preacher, she's gone on to heaven. I said, well, I'm sorry to hear that. Then I thought, no, that's not right. My goodness. So I thought a minute, I said, well, I'm glad to hear it. I thought, good night, that's worse. So I said, well, certainly I'm surprised. And I tell you about this counseling business. It's kind of dangerous. If you haven't had professional expertise in counseling, maybe you better let somebody else do it because, you know, sometimes you say the wrong thing, trips people just like that. I had a lady come in my office not too long ago. She said, Brother George, I need to talk to you a little bit. And I said, well, I'll be glad to talk to you. What's the problem? She said, I want to talk to you about getting a divorce. I said, well, that's really serious. I said, do you have any grounds? She said, yeah, we've got about an acre and a half out there at the edge of town. I said, no, I mean, do you have like a grudge or anything? She said, no, sir, but we got one of the prettiest little carports you ever saw. I said to myself, the lights are on, but nobody's home. I said, lady, I don't think you understand. I said, does the man beat you up? She said, oh, no, I'm up nearly every morning, hour and a half before he is. I said, lady, I don't understand why you want a divorce. She said, because there is no way you can carry on an intelligent conversation with the man. One time I had a couple in my office trying to help them spiritually, and I said to the lady, does your husband believe in life after death? She said, he doesn't believe in life after supper. I guess it takes all kind. And sometimes you try to get the jump on people because, you know, you can tell that they're conniving. So I had a young couple come to me one time. They said, we want to get married, preacher. I said, fine. They said, tell you what we're going to do. We're going to give you $100 to perform this wedding ceremony. And we are going to subtract $1 for every word that you say. Do you understand? I said, I turned to him and I said, take her? He said, yes. I turned to her and I said, take him? She said, yes. I said, took, be $95, please. like to get up. A lot of preachers get in the pulpit and they make announcements like those that we used a minute ago, and there's some kind of error, and it's embarrassing. One of the worst things that can happen to you is, I've known fellows do this, you announce that somebody is seriously ill in the hospital only to discover that they're sitting right there in the audience. You know, you've had that happen. I've even heard of preachers who announced that somebody was ill and they'd passed away. Well, I made a resolution years ago that that wasn't going to happen to me. I said, I'm not going to let that happen to me. So every Sunday morning, first thing, I get up, and while Peg's fixing breakfast, I read the obituary column. I want to know who all has died since I last got word. And there's an interesting thing. If you ever notice people die in alphabetical order, isn't that interesting? It really is. So I'm sitting there at home, and I'm reading the obituary column. I notice who all passed away, and got down here a little further. And look at here. In the obituary column, Georgegoldtrap. I looked at it again. I said, that's me. Look at that. I'm in the obit. Can you believe that? And I thought, must be some mistake, so I read on a little further. Had my address right. Had the names of the children. Had my family. I said, I can't believe that. I thought, oh my. I wonder if the elders have seen this. Wow. I got up right quick and went to the telephone. I called one of the elders. Phone rang. He picked up. Hello. You know, they're always so solemn. Hello. I said, this is George. Yes. I said, have you read the morning paper? Yes. I said, well, did you happen to see the obituary column? He said, yes. Where are you calling from? One time I had a class and I was asking questions. It's not a good idea to get your audience involved in the class unless you're prepared to handle some unusual situations. I had this class and I said, you know, we're all sinners. We all make mistakes. None of us are perfect. And then I just came to me at the last minute. I said, if there's anybody here who has never made a mistake, let him stand up. Well, one man stood up. I said, sir, do you mean to tell me that you have never, ever made a mistake? He said, oh, no, I wouldn't claim that for myself. But he said, I thought I ought to stand up in behalf of my wife's first husband. One time I had a little class of young boys and girls, and I said, who was the first man? The little boy raised his hand and said, horse. I said, horse? I said, don't you mean Adam? He said, oh, I knew it was one of them Cartwright boys. I said to one man in the Bible class, I said, can you give me the geographical location of Dan and Beersheba? He said, you mean they're cities? And I said, well, of course they're cities. He said, well, I thought there's husband and wife like Sodom and Gomorrah. But I'll tell you the honest truth, sometimes it seems like no matter what you say, it's not right. One preacher stopped, for example, on a little country road. He saw a man standing at the fence, been working in his field. He stopped and asked his man and said, hey, brother. He said, I want to ask you a question. Yes, sir. He said, are you lost? And this farmer said, well, no, I don't reckon so. He said, I've been on this place here about 35 years. I pretty well know where I am. Preacher said, no, that's not what I mean. He said, I mean, are you a Christian? He said, oh, no, sir. I said, the Christians own that place on the other side of the county over there. Big barn. Preacher said, no, you don't understand, sir. I said, what I mean is, are you ready for the judgment day? Farmer said, well, when's it a-coming? Preacher said, well, I don't know. Could be today, could be tomorrow. Farmer said, well, for goodness sakes, don't tell my wife. She'll want to go both days. And then sometimes nothing works right. I recall one place I preached, and I tell you, I made a decision a long time ago. I am never, ever, ever again going to preach at some of these places that have the electric hand dryers in the bathroom. You know, you've seen those electric hand dryers. I'm never going to preach at a place that has those things again. I preached at a place one time, hadn't been there but 2 weeks. They had that electric hand dryer in the bathroom. I hadn't been there but 2 weeks. Somebody put a note on that thing, said, press this button for a brief recorded message from our preacher. I got a letter one time. I preached at a place for a good while, and then I left and went to another place, and I got a letter from a real nice sister, and she said, well, we sure do miss you, Brother George. Really do miss you. She said, now, I want you to know we've got a nice new young preacher, and he really is a fine man, but he just doesn't hold me like you used to. I remember that lady well. She came to me one time. She said, oh, Brother George, I'm so glad you're our preacher. She said, I didn't know what sin was till you came here. And don't you love these real staid congregations where everything is so solemn and so quiet, you know? You go in and the first thing you know, they turn the lights down, you know, so everybody can go to sleep. My father used to say, you must have a terrible conscience if you can't sleep in church. Well, this congregation was like that. And so this salesman, he was always traveling everywhere he went, but he made up his mind early in his career. He said, I'm not going to let anything keep me from going to worship. And so he was in this town. He'd never been there before. It was Sunday morning. He got up, looked in the yellow pages, and sure enough, he found where the church was meeting. And so he went down, and he sat down, and he was getting ready, you know, and they lowered the lights. Everything got quiet and solemn. But the preacher was really, really doing good. He's making some good points. The preacher made some strong point, and this man really liked it. He said, amen, brother. Well, man, heads bopped up, and people looked around. Who was that speaking out in church like that? About that time, the preacher made another good point. And he said, right on, preacher. Well, you can imagine by this time, they were really getting upset. So some of the deacons got together back in the back, had a little meeting. Who is that? Well, let's spot him. And so they began looking around. Yeah, I believe he's right down in there. About that time, the preacher made another strong point. He said, praise the Lord. One of the ushers went down the aisle quick as a flash and tapped him on the shoulder and said, fella, we don't praise the Lord here. But I guess my favorite are the things that children say. Now, I know a lot of you sitting here today have taught children's classes, and some of you have had a chance to peek in on the classes. Some of the things that children say are just hilarious. For example, I recall one time teaching a children's class, and a little boy went home, reported to his daddy. His dad said, what'd you learn in class today? He said, I learned all about Moses and the children of Israel crossing the Red Sea. His dad said, well, tell me about it. He said, oh, there's not much to it, Pop. He said, they went up to the Red Sea, and they couldn't get across. The Egyptian soldiers were coming at him and said, so Moses brought in one of his very best civil engineers, and he built this big suspension bridge right across the Red Sea. And they all marched across. And he said, then when the soldiers from the Egyptian army, when they got on the bridge, Moses brought in one of his demolition experts. And they put dynamite on that bridge and blew it all to pieces. His dad said, surely your teacher didn't tell you any such story as that. He said, no, but if I was to tell it like she did, you wouldn't believe it. You remember when we started, I said to you that laughter would make you feel a lot better. Now tell me something. Don't you feel a lot better? I tell you this, you look a lot better. I tell young preachers all the time, I say, boys, when you're preaching about heaven, you ought to smile. On the other hand, if you're preaching about hell, probably your regular face will do all right. I ran across this little poem several years ago, and we'll close with this. It's the value of a smile. A smile costs nothing, but it's greatly valued. A smile enriches the recipient and costs the giver nothing. Smiles are instantaneous, but long remembered. None are so rich but that they need a smile, and none are so poor but that are richer from having received a smile. Smiles create happiness at home, at work, or on the playground. Smiles are the countersign of friendship. They are rest to the weary, encouragement to the saddened, sunshine to the depressed. Smiles are nature's cure-all. Smiles cannot be bought, sold, begged, borrowed, or stolen. They increase in value when given away. See someone with their smile missing? Give him one of yours, for he needs one most of all. Some take smiles wherever they go. Some whenever they go. If you'll notice on the wall back there as you go out, you're going to see a little round device that's on almost every wall in every big building. It's a thermostat. And in the middle of the thermostat, there usually will be a smaller instrument that's a thermometer. Now, I don't know whether you've ever thought about this or not. What's the difference between a thermostat and a thermometer? Well, I'll tell you the difference. You see, if the room is too cold, a thermometer says, "Grrr, it's cold," but it does nothing about it. If the room is too hot, the thermometer says, "It's too hot," but it does nothing about it. A thermostat, on the other hand, says, "This room is too cold," and it warms the room up. Or the thermostat says, "This room is too hot," and it cools the room down. A thermostat improves its environment. To which I say, God, give us more thermostats, for the church is full of thermometers. The next time you get down and out, and you think nothing's going to happen right, you just say to yourself, "Hey, even corn on the cob is better off." Thank you so much for letting me come. Thank you. You're a great audience. Thank you. Thank you.